Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, especially students in the Faculty of Business and Economics and the Faculty of ICT, welcome to this session of Principles of Management. And today we are going to look into our fifth chapter, which discusses about the directing function. In this chapter, we are going to discuss a number of issues. Remember, previously we had looked into the functions of management, where we say that we generally have 5 major functions: planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. These are the major functions that which are involved in the principles of management. And this diagram here tries to illustrate to us these processes, beginning from planning, you go to organizing, to staffing, directing, and finally controlling. This illustrates how they are connected to one another, all these major functions. And just to begin with, a simple question: what is directing? Directing is the process of integrating the people with the organization so as to obtain their willing and enthusiastic for the achievement of its goals. That is what we mean by directing. It is a process where you are going to integrate every person who is working in the organization for the purpose of ensuring that you get their wholeheartedness for the achievement of organizational goals, so that you make sure that everybody, whatever he or she is going to do to the company, is for the benefit of the whole organization. Generally, that is what we imply by the directing function. And in order to get this enthusiasm of the people, you must have some skills as a leader. To actually direct the behavior of individuals, a manager requires 3 basic skills, namely leadership, motivational, and communication skills. Therefore, this chapter that we are going to discuss today, we are going to look into these 3 basic elements of directing. If you want to be a good director, you want to show, or you want to direct, or you want to get the enthusiasm of the employees, you must be able to have these skills in leadership, in motivation, and also in communication. Just to look into the leadership skill. Leading is the function of management involving the process of influencing people so that they will contribute to organization and group goals. It is a process of influencing people. You are going to make somebody to do something so that he or she can contribute to the goals of the organization and the group. So how do you influence people? That is another skill that you must be able to have. That's what leadership actually is all about. In another definition, we say that it is the ability of a manager to influence subordinates to work with confidence and enthusiasm. That is, with energy and interest. As a manager, you must be able to influence subordinates, that is your workers or the employees, so that they can be able to work with confidence and enthusiasm. When you look into these 2 definitions of leadership, there is a key term that we find inside here. That is influence. So in order to lead, or in order to become a good leader of an organization, you must be able to influence people so that they can act in a particular way. As we have seen in our first definition, we have the term influencing people is applicable here. And in another definition, we find also influencing subordinates. So in order to lead, you must be able to influence people so that they can be able to act in a particular way as required by the organization. Leading concerns the total manner in which a manager influences actions of subordinates. It includes many activities involved in the manner in which a manager influences actions of subordinates, such as the issuing of orders that is clear, complete, and practicable, the motivation of workers to try to meet the expectations of the manager, and maintenance of discipline and rewarding those who perform properly. So when you talk about that manner of a manager influencing the actions of subordinates, how do you influence the action of subordinates? As we have seen in our previous two definitions, the term influence is appearing in both definitions. So how do you influence people so that they can act in a particular way? Different ways that which we can influence people include issuing of orders. Of Somali we say amar. You have to issue orders to your employees so that they can do what you order them to do. And your order must be very clear, it must be complete, and it must be an order that which can be done. You cannot give somebody an order of jumping from a tall building until down. That is an order which actually is not doable, not practicable. And your order must also be very, very clear. By clarity here, we mean that don't give order with terms which are actually difficult for an employee to understand. Use very simple terms when you are giving an order, and also it must be a complete order. So issuing of orders is one way that which we can influence the actions of our subordinates or our employees. Another way that we can influence the action of employees is by motivation of workers. You have to motivate those workers so that they try to meet the expectations of the manager. Different ways that which you can motivate workers. A simple thank you, or a simple smile, or a simple amount of money. Just give something small, like a tip to your employee. Those are the different ways that which you can motivate a worker so that he or she can do what you are telling him to do. So by motivation of workers, it means that you are going to influence their actions and do whatever you want them to do. And also maintenance of discipline and rewarding those who perform properly. As a leader, if you want to influence the actions of your subordinates, you must make sure that you maintain discipline among them. And anybody who is going to perform his work properly, according to the terms agreed upon, then he or she must be rewarded. So influence is the most important thing that which a manager or a leader uses while directing the actions of his or her employees. And how do you influence the actions of the subordinates? You influence by issuing orders. You influence by motivating of the workers. You also influence workers by maintenance of discipline and also rewarding those that are performing very well in the company. In order for us to influence, we must be able to have power. You cannot influence action of an employee if you don't have the power or authority. So it is important to look into the concept of power and authority in leadership. In influencing subordinates, leaders use power and authority. Power is the potential ability to affect the behavior of the other, while authority is power created and granted by the organization. We must be able to understand the difference between the two terms, power and authority. In organizational setting, the power that we have is not termed as power. It is termed as authority. And that's why in our explanation here we say authority is power created and granted by the organization. A general manager of an organization has his own authority or his own power. A head of department in an organization has his own authority. An employee at the same time also has his own authority. So power is the potential ability to affect the behavior of another person. Your ability to affect the behavior of another person is regarded as power. And in organizational setting, there are 5 sources of power. Where can a leader or a manager get his powers from? We have legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, referent, and expert power. The legitimate power, this one here is granted through the organizational hierarchy. So it is the power that occupies each position. All managers have legitimate power over their subordinates. In an organizational setting, for example, in an organizational structure, we have those people that are on top, then we have their subordinates that come below them. For example, in a structure of an organization, on top we can have the president of the organization or the general manager. Under the president we can have maybe the vice president. Under the vice president we can have the heads of different departments. For example, the head department of finance, department of HR, department of sales and marketing, department of productions or operations. So every position that is held in that structure has its own powers. Each individual or each manager that occupies a position in an organization has powers. That type of power is what we call legitimate power, and it is granted through the organizational hierarchy, as we saw last time when we were learning the organizing function, the different structures of organization. So in each position of a structure, there are some powers that which are granted to an individual. The second source of power is the reward power. The reward power is the power to give or withhold rewards. Rewards that may be under the control of an individual manager may include, for example, salary increase, bonuses, promotion, recommendation, praise, recognition, and even interesting job assignments. So a manager has the power to either give reward to an employee or not give rewards to an employee. You can decide. Any employee who is going to work very well according to the terms agreed upon, such an employee should be rewarded. And as a manager, once you reward this kind of an employee, it automatically implies that you are exercising your reward power. You see, once you give such a reward, an employee is going to be very happy and will be able to do what he or she is required to do. It means that now you are using your power to give reward in order to influence somebody to perform his or her duty. Or you can withhold the reward. You can decide, any person who is not working well, I'm not going to give any reward. So meaning that if an employee is going to realize that if I'm not going to work hard, I will not be rewarded. Therefore, the employee will be motivated, will work very hard, automatically to get the reward from the manager. So a manager can be able to use the reward power to influence the actions or the behavior of his or her employees. Another source of power is the coercive power. And with coercive power, we imply that it is the power to force compliance via psychological, emotional, or physical threat. In some isolated settings, coercion can take the form of physical punishment. Coercive power. Although this source of power, it is not encouraged in organizational setting. Because with coercive power, it means that as a manager, you are going to use force. That's why in our definition here, we say that it is the power to force compliance via psychological, emotional, or even physical threat. meaning that you are going to use your position as a manager or as a leader to force an employee to do what he or she is supposed to do. A very good example of leaders who use coercive power are dictators, for example. So you as a manager, you don't need to use coercive power to influence an employee, although it is one of the sources, but we do not advise the usage of this source of power because it can be destructive sometimes to an organization. However, also depending with the situation, there are situations whereby somebody can be forced, a manager can be forced to use coercive power to force an employee to do something. However, it should not reach the extent of physical punishment. In some isolated settings, coercion can take the form of physical punishment, and this is not good in an organizational setting. It is not good for you to punish your employee physically, beating them. That one, it used to happen very long time ago, but right now it is actually not advisable. So coercive power, meaning use of force and threat, is also another source of what we call influence, power for influencing the behavior of employees. Another important source is the referent power. The referent power, this is more abstract to the previous powers. It is based on identification, imitation, or even charisma. I.e., that's to say, followers may react favorably to a leader because they identify themselves in some way with the leader, who may be like them in personality, ability, background, or even attitudes. So with referent power, this is more abstract. It is something which is actually, you cannot be able to see it. But the followers are going to look at the behavior of their leader, how their leader is behaving, and then they will try to imitate. That's why you say here it is based on identification, imitation, or even charisma. The followers will look at how their leader is behaving, his way of walking, his way of doing things, his way of talking, his way of dressing, and many other things. And then they will try to imitate, or in other words, they will try to copy what the leader is actually doing. A very good example is how we follow our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How does Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam influence the behavior of his followers? Some of us, we are Muslims, but we have never seen Prophet Muhammad with our own eyes. But basing on what we hear about his behavior, about his way of life, and everything, so we try to copy the way Prophet Muhammad was living his life. So the Prophet has used this kind of a referent power to influence the behavior of his followers, because we look at the behavior of such a leader, and then we feel like really we need to identify ourselves with such behavior. We have to copy the behavior of our leader. So such kind of a source of power is what we refer to as a referent power. Then finally, the fifth source of power we have is the expert power. And when we talk about the expert power, here we mean that a manager is going to use his expertise, his skill, or his knowledge to influence the behaviors of others. Expert power is derived from information or expertise. As a leader, what do you know? What skills do you have? So you use your skill to influence other people to do what you need them to do. For example, if I am the manager of a telecommunication company, automatically it means that I should be able to know how to deal with the telecommunication gadgets. I should know how to control telecommunication towers. so that in case of anything, my leaders will, my followers will come to me and ask me, manager, how do we connect these towers from one point to another point? What should we do to connect one line to another line? So I will use my knowledge, my information, or my expertise to explain to the followers and do what I need them to do. So as a leader, you can use your expertise or your knowledge to influence people to behave in a particular way. So when you talk about influencing of employees' behavior as a manager or as a leader, you need to have power. You cannot influence the behavior of an employee if you do not have what you call power. And the different sources of power that which we have already talked about include the legitimate power, which is granted through the organizational settings or organizational hierarchy. We also have the reward power, that is the ability to either give or withhold rewards. Also coercive power, which is actually use of force and even physical threat, which actually we don't advise you to apply. And also we have the referent power, which is based on the followers looking at your behavior and then they copy everything that which you do. And also the expert power, which is actually based on the information that you have. So what do we use the power for? As leaders, power is used for various aspects. The varieties of ways in which a manager can use power depend on what kind of powers are available to the manager. For example, the legitimate power is used for making legitimate requests. You can make requests from one office to another office. Maybe you are the president or the general manager of the company. You can make requests to the head department of finance to do something. You use your legitimate power for making requests. Also for instrumental compliance, you can use your power so that you can be able to make people to comply with the policies of the company or the organization. For coercion, that is the coercive power, is used for forcing people, threatening people to do something, which actually I don't advise you to use. Also we have rational persuasion. You want to persuade people to do something. You want to explain to somebody that doing A is good than doing B. You can use power to do that. Also for personal identification, power is used to identify ourselves. You want somebody to know you are the manager or you're the head of the department, you are the leader of a company. You can use your power to identify such. Also for inspirational appeal, like the referent power, you inspire people to do the things which you want them to do. And also power is used for informational distortion. So all these are the uses of power. How we can use power, you have to look into that. Leadership theories. With leadership theories, here we are talking about the different theories that were put forward by different authors on aspects of leadership. Leadership did not start yesterday or today, but it started long time ago. Ever since Allah created the human being, from the time when Adam alayhi salam was created, there have been leaders. We have been having leaders all over the world, and until today we have leaders. So it is not a new thing. The systematic study of personal characteristics and traits of leaders began as consequence of the need for military officials during World War I, that is in 1914 to 1918. Many business and governmental organizations also began to attempt to discover the characteristics that distinguish their most effective managers from the least effective one. We have been having leaders since the time Allah created the world. However, the study of the characteristics of these leaders to differentiate between the most effective leaders from the least effective ones, to explain the characteristics of a good leader and the characteristics of a bad leader. All this study began after the First World War. Remember, what led to the World War was the characteristics of the leaders. You find those powers that engage themselves into the First World War, mostly those countries were dragged into war by their leaders. So after this World War, many governments and many organizations began now to look into leadership styles, leadership characteristics, and many other things. They wanted to know really, why did countries actually enter into war? What made the leaders decide to go to the First World War? So what were the characteristics of those leaders that were successful and those leaders that were not successful during the war? So as a result of that, many theories were put forward to explain the different leaderships that which we have. Number one we have is the trait theory. This theory examines successful leadership from the standpoint of individual personal characteristics, such as intelligence, initiative, self-assurance, and many others. As a result of this, we find that a question is asked: what is it about the person that makes him a good leader? The underlying assumption of the trait approach is that there exists some basic trait or set of traits that differentiates leaders from non-leaders. It is assumed that leaders are different from other people. According to the trait theory, this one here, it explains successful leadership from the standpoint of individual personal characteristics. That is why we use the term trait. It's a psychological term to mean personal characteristics such as intelligence, initiative, self-assurance, and many others. Different people have different characteristics. We have those people that are very good in what you call socializing with people, very good in making friendships and many others. We have those people that actually they feel inferior and they are always alone. They don't feel like they want to engage themselves with many other people and many other things. So what kind of a characteristic should a leader have? Should he be an intelligent person, a person who is initiative, a person who is able to begin something new and grow it up? So what makes a leader to be a good leader? So there are some basic traits or a set of traits that differentiates leaders from non-leaders. If you look at a leader, you can be able to identify this one is a leader and this one is not a leader. You just look at the way the person actually looks like. Then you can determine what type of a leader he or she is. So according to this theory, it is assumed that leaders are different from other people, meaning that there are some certain traits or certain characteristics that a leader should have, which is actually different from what other people have. The second theory is the two-dimensional theory. Rather than focusing on characteristic of effective leaders, an alternative is to focus on their behavior. The question then becomes, what do effective leaders do that ineffective ones do not? So apart from the trait, looking into the trait or characteristic of a leader, we can also look into their behavior. How do effective leaders behave? What do they do? For example, are effective leaders democratic rather than autocratic? Are they permissive rather than directive? Are they person-oriented rather than task-oriented? Generally, such terms refer to whether the leader's behavior reflects primary concern for the work or for the people who are actually doing the work. The behavior of the leader. Is he a person who really thinks about only the work, or is he a person who thinks about the workers? And that's why here we have a very good example here. What should effective leaders behave like? Are they going to be democratic rather than autocratic? A democratic leader is that leader who sits, discusses with his followers and makes decisions based on the majority of the followers? Or is he an autocratic? Autocratic means a dictator, a person who makes decisions by himself without making any consultation. Is he a permissive rather than directive? Are you that kind of a leader who is going to actually give yourself to your employees and listen to what they say and work together with your employees? Or you are going to be a leader who is only going to be issuing orders and directive, and you just sit in your chair, you do nothing, you only tell employees to do what they're supposed to do? Or are you that kind of a leader who is person-oriented rather than task-oriented? Are you that leader who is thinking about your workers? You think a lot about your workers, how they are to develop, how they are going to increase their skills, how you're going to help them in their social life and other aspects of life. Or you're only going to be task-oriented. You're only going to think about the work instead of the workers. So what kind of a behavior should a leader have? So when we talk about the two-dimensional theory, instead of focusing on the characteristics alone, a leader is going to focus on both the characteristic, that is the behavior, the characteristic, that is the trait, and also the behavior to determine what kind of a leader he or she is. Then the third theory is the contingency or the situational theory. The contingency theory here, it views or it indicates that the best way to lead varies with the forces that exist in a specific situation. Some situation can determine how you are going to lead or what type of leadership style you are going to exercise. Here, effective leadership depends on the interaction of the leader's personal characteristics, the leader's behavior, and factors in the leadership situation. In a sense, the situational approach is based on the idea that effective leadership cannot be explained by any other one factor. According to the contingency theory, effective leadership is not going to depend only on the characteristic of the leader. It's not going to depend only on the behavior of the leader, but rather it's going to be dependent on three major factors. That's why you say that effective leadership depends on the interaction of the leader's personal characteristics, that is number one, the leader's behavior, that is number two, and factors in the leadership situation. These three factors determine how effective a leader is going to exercise his duties. Depending on your characteristics, that is the trait theory. Depending on your behavior, that is the behavioral theory. And depending on the factors in the leadership situation. Now, when you look into this contingency theory, it is a combination of what we call the other two theories plus situational theory, the situation which a leader is actually conducting his or her leadership practices. This theory has combined the trait theory plus the two-dimensional theory plus the situation. Because personal characteristic, this one here, it is the trait theory. Behavior, this one here, it talks about in the two-dimensional theory. And also the factors in the leadership situation. So these three factors determine the effectiveness of a leader. So in order for us to have a good leader, we must look into all the three. And that's why we say that in a sense, the situational approach is based on the idea that effective leadership cannot be explained by any other one factor. You cannot explain effective leadership using trait theory alone. You cannot explain effective leadership using behavior theory alone, but rather it needs a combination of both of all the theories. So the theories of leadership we have looked into are those three major theories involving, that is the trait theory, we have the two-dimensional theory, and we also have the contingency or the situational theory. Then we come into the leadership styles. Leadership style implies the way in which the leader exercises leadership. It is the way in which the functions of leadership are carried out, or the way how the leader behaves towards their subordinates in the accomplishment of the work. How do you behave towards your workers or employees? These ways of behaving towards subordinates are influenced by management philosophy towards work and people. Behind every managerial decision or action are assumptions about human nature behavior. How do you behave towards your workers? We have had different leaders ever since the beginning of the world until today. We have had leaders like Adolf Hitler. Some of us regard him as a dictator, and others will look at him as a leader who did what he did because of the situation that which he was living in, or he was directing his people. So we have had different types of leaders. These different types of leaders have behaved in different ways. There are those leaders who have been behaving, as we are going to look into these styles. There are those who have been behaving very good towards their followers or employees, and there are those who have been behaving very, very bad towards their employees or their leaders. What makes a leader to behave in such a way? Behind every managerial decision or action are assumptions about human nature behavior. Your belief about the human behavior can determine how you are going to behave towards them as a leader. This is explained based on the different theories. For example, we have the theory X and theory Y. This theory was developed by a man called Douglas McGregor, and according to theory X, it states that there is no intrinsic satisfaction in work, and that humans avoid it as much as possible, and that positive direction is needed to achieve organizational goals, and that workers possess little ambition or originality. According to theory X, it says that people don't like work. Naturally, that's what it says. People don't like doing their work. People like staying at home, socializing with people, but when it comes to the issues of work, they don't like working. That is what theory X generally believes in. Now, if you are a leader and you believe in theory X, how will you behave towards your workers or employees? Automatically, you will be, let's say, a kind of a dictator, because naturally you believe that people don't like working. Now, in order for them to work, you have to provide constant supervision. You have to check them every now and then. You have to direct them on their work, whatever they are doing, see what they are doing every time, because you believe that they do not like to do work. Apart from theory X, we also have theory Y. And theory Y assumes that work is natural phenomena. And if the contents are favorable, people will not only accept responsibility, but they will cede it. They will keep it well. If people are committed to organizational objectives, they will exercise self-decision and self-control. So theory Y is the opposite of theory X, because theory X believes people don't like work, like in theory Y believes people like to do work, meaning that once they get the work, they will accept responsibilities and they will do everything they are told to do. And these people are going to be committed to organizational objectives, and they will also exercise self-decision and self-control. Meaning that according to theory Y, people like to work. So if people like to work, if you are the manager or the leader and you believe in theory Y, how will you behave towards your workers? Automatically, you will be, let's say, you'll exercise some kind of democracies, meaning that you will let your workers do whatever they want, because naturally you believe that they like to do the work. So you don't need to check them. You don't need to supervise them every time. You don't need every time to go and see what they are doing, direct them. You don't need all that, because naturally you believe that they like to do their work. They will do their work. You believe that they will exercise self-decision and even they will control themselves in the workplace. So if you are this kind of a leader who believes in theory Y, the way you behave towards your workers is different from that a leader who will believe in theory X. Autocratic or authoritarian leadership. According to authoritarian leadership, tasks are assigned, facilities are provided, and direction given without consultation with the employee carrying out the job. Here we are talking about a dictator, dictatorial leaders. So according to this authoritarian leadership, you are going to give work to your workers and everything, but you will not consult them. You will not ask them for anything about their ideas and their thoughts. This is a dictator. An autocratic or authoritarian leader is the same as a dictator. The authoritarian leader believes that because of his position, he can decide best what should be done. So, meaning that this autocratic leader is that kind of a leader who believes in theory X. That means that people don't like work, and in order to make them work, you must control them. This is the opposite of a democratic leader or a participative leadership style. Democratic leadership is characterized by participation of the group and utilization of its opinions. Initiative by those being led is encouraged. The leader suggests possible actions with his recommendations but awaits approval of the group before putting them into effort. So with the democratic leadership, this is the opposite of autocratic or dictatorial leadership. That's why we say that it is characterized by participation of the group and utilization of its opinions, different from what we call an autocratic. Then we have a laissez-faire leadership style. The laissez-faire leadership style depends completely on his subordinates. The leader will depend completely on his subordinates to establish their own goals and to make their own decisions. Meaning that this kind of a leadership style is practiced by a leader who believes in theory Y. Because according to theory Y, a manager is going to believe that people like to work, people can exercise self-decision, and people can actually control themselves in the workplace. So you don't need to check them. You have to leave the workers to do what they are supposed to do. So according to laissez-faire, meaning that this kind of a leader is going to leave his employees, let them do whatever they want, because you believe that every employee has what we call self-control, can control his own work, and therefore you don't need to check such kind of an employee. Leave him, let him do whatever he does, because you believe he or she can do the work correctly according to the terms and conditions agreed upon. So the final one we have is the situational leadership style, and here effectiveness of one or the other leadership style depends on a particular situation. There are some situations where you can behave as a dictator, some situation where you can behave as a democrat, and some situation where you can behave as a laissez-faire leader, depending on the situation. because human behavior is difficult to predict. You don't know how an employee is going to behave. As a result of this, you need to do what? You need to control them, supervise them, check them every time, whatever they are doing in the company or in the organization. So, and there are some situations whereby you don't need to check the employee's work. So, depending on the situation, you can actually practice a leadership style which is actually required. Sometimes, meaning that according to the situation and leadership style, sometimes you can exercise autocratic, authoritarian leadership, or sometimes you can practice democratic leadership style, or sometimes you can practice laissez-faire leadership style. That is the situational leadership. So according to what we have just looked into, that is the leadership style. In order for us to behave in a particular way towards our subordinates, there is a belief that we have. Either we believe that people don't like work, that is theory X. So if we believe that people don't like work, then automatically we will behave in authoritarian or autocratic, a more dictatorial way. Or we believe that people like work, that is theory Y. And if we believe that people like work, then automatically we will behave in either a democratic way or we will behave in a laissez-faire way. So depending on your belief, either theory X or theory Y, you will find yourself either exercising autocratic leadership or democratic leadership or laissez-faire leadership style, or sometimes situational leadership style, depending on the situation which you are actually in.